No one's ever
Haugli.
gotten it right.
Haugli?
Yep, like this.
Call it like it's my British accent. Haugli.
Yep,
That's what I thought I
that's not how you
said.
spell it, but that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, that's what I thought I said. But I blame the fact that I've. All right, well, we'll do it. And then you can criticize me live and it's all good. And then I'll get you to say my name again. Okay, ready to go?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, I'm going to do a 3, 2. Okay, I'm here with Brian Haugli. And I hope I said your name right because we just said it 5 times before we started recording. Was it
You got
close?
it, Steve. Yes, Steve. Yep, you got
All
it.
right. Thank you. You have many titles: managing partner, SideChannel, CEO, real CISO. You have your own YouTube channel. You're very prolific as a CISO. And I wanted to talk to you about the struggles of being a CISO and how that impacts developers, because that's kind of the world that I live in at the moment. Welcome to the show. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for having me. Love talking about this topic. Just whatever experiences that I've had that I can bring forward, that's useful for everyone. That's what I'm here for.
All right. Well, speaking of experiences you've had, let's see if you can give me an introduction to that experience in as concise a way as you possibly can to make it relevant for the listeners.
Yeah, I've been in security for as long as I can remember. Pretty much out of high school, and then working in the field before even going to college. Ended up working at the college I was in, got a bachelor's in network administration. And I spent 10 years in DC supporting a number of different DoD and intelligence community agencies. I got scooped up in 2015 by a Fortune 500 to be their first vice president and CISO. I worked, brought me up to the Boston area here. Did that until 2019. And kind of during the last part of that time, I started a company called SideChannel to really start bringing former and current CISOs at the time experience into mid-market companies, mostly with CIOs who, really needed security advice, couldn't afford a full-time CISO, it didn't make financial sense for that company to do it. And we really just kind of had this side hustle and started bringing these capabilities and this experience to these companies that really needed it. And then I took that company full time in 2019, and we've been doing great. We've been growing. We're over 22 people now. We're across the entire U.S. and now in Canada, providing virtual CISOs into middle market, and that middle market extends all the way up to 3 billion in revenue size organizations. During that time, I developed a software platform called Real CISO that allows us to quickly and efficiently do a risk assessment and gap analysis against a series of standards. And that was based on the sole fact that the first thing a CISO does when they go into an organization is do an assessment, figure out what you're working with. Since that was a lot of the same processes, we developed a software that allowed us to just scale that to all of our clients and then shrink the amount of time. And then last October, we launched it as its own company and started making it directly available to the public. Technically, even some of our own side channel competition uses it as a way to do assessments.
Cool.
And yeah, so I get to run 2 companies. I get to work on a lot of really interesting things, and I keep doing what I like to do best, which is solve problems.
So, what made you move from being part of a Fortune 500 company as being a CISO in that organization to thinking that I'm going to move into something where I can help organizations that, as you said, maybe can't afford a CISO on their own? Was there a gap that became evident to you that made you feel this is required?
There was, and I think it was during probably um, my last role at within Pentagon when I was living in DC, and then when I was up here in Boston with this Fortune 500 insurance company. As the leader for security, looking at third parties and vendors, I constantly just kept running into. There was no one like me on the other end of the phone that could articulate what their security posture was, what their program was going to look like, what gaps they had, why they had those gaps, what they're going to do about those gaps. And I think early on it was just like, oh man, I can't believe there's not enough people to be able to go fill this. And then as I went into corporate America and just kept seeing it outside of DoD, something just snapped, and it was like, hey, there's a business opportunity here. One, right? There's a very underserved market. And two, a lot of large organizations, mine included, really rely on these small businesses to be successful. So if these large organizations have the money and the funding to get someone like me and build a team, great. They can go do that. But who's helping everyone else? And I've always, it's called altruistic, call it what you want, but I'm big on helping people. I like mentoring folks. I want to see people be successful. And the fact that small businesses, mid-sized businesses can't afford, or be able to, get enough access to people with the right qualifications, I think in the long term is going to hurt society. It's going to hurt the U.S. I have some national interests, in mind there. So it just made sense to just take the business opportunity and couple it with what we wanted to do, and start driving, this capability and this offering into the marketplace. And early on, it was a big gamble. It's like, okay, why would you, why would you step away from a guaranteed salary and talk show circuits and all the things that come along with being a CISO at a large organization to go now start supporting mid-market businesses? And it's paid off. I mean, we've got great clients. We keep getting more. We're growing significantly, and it's not just because we're good at it. It's because the market truly, truly needs this, and they have nowhere else to go. Um, a full-time CISO is like a quarter million, $300,000, easy to start to walk in the door. No company can do that. I know $1 billion revenue companies that would be a stretch for them to have alongside the CIO, an entire IT team, and all these other things. So why not spend a little bit of money on the CISO role and in a virtualized fractional way, and maybe even just the strategy itself, and then take that savings and apply it to the engineering, the architecture, the capabilities to actually make the changes. So you don't necessarily need strategy full time, but you do need it. So that's been our approach, and that's what we've seen, really good customer feedback on.
Well, you tapped into something really interesting there, and that is while you were at a Fortune 500 company, there were a lot of mid-market companies or smaller businesses that can't afford a CISO that you depended on. And you kind of allude to that, the notion of business supply chain, where it's all fine that I've got all my security in place, but what about my business dependencies? Are they secure,
Right.
and can somebody compromise them in order to compromise me? And that something that you identified as well as part of your motivation?
So that was something I saw much more prevalent when I was inside of DoD and working within the federal space. It was far easier for attackers to get in through a subsidiary or a contractor or a third party vendor than it was to try to break in through the front door of an organization or just get into that organization. This actually came true. The one use case I know stands out for me the most was National Institute of Health back during I think it was about 2014, 2015 timeframe. They had a real problem. They were secure in themselves to the level that which was right for them. They probably could have done better, but either way, they had a real problem with attackers coming in through all these other third parties, and it was like very evident and very real. And the thinking that really moved me was talking to people there who were going, "Well, we're secure, and while we're a target, we're appropriately addressing us being a target." But they just could not hear or understand. But you are the target, and people are going in through others to get to you. You need to do something about them. Well, oh, well, that's on them. They have to take care of that. Well, no, not really. You have a responsibility if you're going to keep using them to either help them or change vendors. Well, we can't change vendors because they're the best and they're the only ones, or this reason or that reason. It's like, well, then you're making a risk decision to accept that type of risk, and that's probably not a good move. So that was really a moment for me when I saw that. And then as I left government and went over to corporate, it was just even much more. I was actually expecting to leave the DoD and walk into a corporate setting and expect to just kind of see full embracement of best practices and doing much more because the financing was there, the thinking was there. I was, insurance is kind of inside of the financial sector. So I loosely associated their security with bank level security and thinking. I was wrong, completely wrong. And third party vendor assessments, third party risk management was not even on roadmaps. It wasn't even being discussed. It was barely being done at a contract level during procurement. And this wasn't just with the company I was with. This was very prevalent across the other CISOs and my peers that I was meeting and getting to know in corporate America, especially up here in the Boston area and New York, and then back into DC. I was like, oh no, this is a very real problem across everyone. We just kind of all assumed it was being taken care of. It's like, oh well, that can be done in contracting. It's like, no, limitations of liability only goes so far. Like you can't just, there's a crazy saying in, you ever seen The Incredibles 2 or The Incredibles? It's a
Mhm.
great movie. Um, and in there, he says to Mr. Incredible, he's like, let's not jump right into, insurance will take care of everything. Like, let's let's try something smart and sound first before we just jump into relying on contracting or insurance and all these ancillary risk management moves. Like, we need to do something direct today with these people. Let's try that first. So yeah, and it's still going on. It's the news. What does show up in the news, it's very evident that third party vendor risk management is not as looked at keenly as it should be.
Yeah, and so this is well, this is evident to you because you're seeing it firsthand. How do those who are the mid-level organizations, or even if we go as far as being startups,
Mhm.
how do they identify that they need you, or how do you identify that they need you?
So
With the
one of
exception
the
of real CISO, perhaps.
yeah, so I mean, software. That's really to scale out and help as many
Mhm.
people kind of get through a gap analysis and maybe lead them to needing someone like me or somebody from my team to support them. But you have to look at yourself. One, do you believe that security is an enterprise level risk? If you don't believe that, it, it's a very fruitless conversation for me to even sit down with you and tell you what we do, because you don't believe the things that we do addresses a risk that you identify that you have. Like, if you live in the world of I'm not a target, I'm not going to sell you security. You either believe it's a risk or it's not. Period. So that's usually the first litmus test. After that, it's do you have an IT leader or a general counsel, or a CFO? We see those three groups predominantly have an eye out for, this is a risk to this organization. We're not doing enough based on their own experience or what they're hearing about that they should be, and they need to do something. But they're blocked by the fact that they can't afford that full-time role, or they don't even know how to necessarily start. We do a lot with startups who are pre-series A and series A, who should at some point within their 18 months to 24-month future have a full-time CISO. So we work ourselves out of a job, but we get those people to start thinking about it, and we fill that role with a virtual CISO for that time frame so they can grow up appropriately. They can start putting in those components. So when they get their forever CISO, or whoever's going to be in that role for as long as they will be, there's a program already established, and they're not just starting from new. So you're not wasting that 2 years of time until you can afford the full-time CISO to then build the program. You're using it to effectively start building something, maybe bringing an engineer, maybe bringing an analyst, maybe finding the right MSSP service provider, the right methods to bring into your DevOps development, and looking at your pipeline, start thinking about those things, getting that insight. You're getting that until you get someone who can be full time. But like I said, we have large publicly traded companies that don't have full time CISOs, and we're there with them because they have somebody who's a CIO or a CFO or a legal who realizes this is a cost effective means to be able to address the issues that we have. This is a known quantity, and for us, our hallmark differentiator, against anyone else, is we only hire former CISOs, and that's who we bring in to be the vCISO for any of our companies. All of our competition, if you have a CISSP, if you've been a director of security, if you've had any other role, we're not seeing anyone else take the model that we have, which is people who have actually done this job for years at larger organizations and smaller organizations are now the person that is helping you build your program. So that's been our hallmark differentiator. And that's probably the one big thing that we see our clients take advantage of is, hey, I get access to somebody who's done this. They know how to talk to the board. They know how to talk to the CEO. They can talk to my customers. They have an executive presence. That's important to them. But they can also address the actual strategy and the tactical elements that are needed inside that organization.
Well, to know as well as an incoming CISO, to know that somebody with experience has been there establishing, whereas a strategy and has
Right.
done a gap analysis. And perhaps I'm not as experienced as you are, but if I were to go in and I'm asking the right questions and I see that this is in place, it's more likely that they're going to get good people to follow up from you. I imagine is the case.
Yeah, we've definitely been in roles where we've helped interview and help that client staff their full-time CISO, and then been able to talk to them and be able to say, look, you're not walking into, you know, a total mess. Like, this is what we've built already. So unless you're one of those types, and there are those types out there, and this is fine, it's not a criticism, but there are those types out there who want to be builders. They want to build the thing from the ground up. I'm like that. I love building things. I like operations and maintenance a little less. Okay, a lot less than I like building something. So for those folks, they're probably walking into that role going, oh, well, what am I building on top of, or how much farther do I have to build this based on the size of the company? Okay, not enough, probably not the right fit for them. But that doesn't, discount the amount of available folks out there who can still maybe take this as their first CISO role. Maybe they were a deputy CISO at a larger organization. Maybe they were a director level or manager level, and this is their first CISO role. But they're going into it with the establishment of something that's been created by somebody who has done this for a long time. So they've got that type of solace. Plus, then the client gets somebody for maybe a little cheaper, can groom them a little bit more. We see that type of dynamic work out very well with a lot of different groups when they're looking for getting away from our model, which is, hey, we should have somebody full time. Okay, well, that's a great talk track. Here's how this can work out for you. So that's been about it. It's we don't like seeing clients leave, but we also understand that we're not going to be there forever, and clients need to grow up, and some of them we even say, look, you're big enough, you need somebody full time in this role. It just makes sense for your culture, for your organization, for your investors. You should
Mhm.
you should go do this.
And then you might get top-down references because they're going to have the new companies that they depend on.
Right. I mean,
I would hope.
every client to me is a great referral and someone who I can point to and say, look what we did. This is what we built for this organization to reduce their risk and address risk for them. I don't have a single client, I don't think, that wouldn't give us a reference or talk about us to anybody else. Heck, we don't even have a sales team. Like, I haven't made a cold call ever, right? We have zero sales team.
Wow.
We are built, and we've built our entire revenue stream and our entire organization on referrals and references. And that a lot of that comes from clients, or even, somebody who was at one company, left, went to another company and said, hey, this place needs security. I know who we're going to call. Boom. So yeah, it's
Amazing.
keeping clients happy, making sure you're meeting what they need. They become your sales team.
Amazing, amazing. So I'm going to try and pivot this around to, I guess, the people who tend to listen to this podcast. I mean, I came from originally a developer, then into
Mm-hmm.
security, and then into kind of cloud infrastructure, and then kind of back into development again, which is kind of weird, oddly full circle. So I've seen that struggle as people are trying to implement security initiatives and how that really kind of washes over the development community who vastly outnumber security generally.
Right.
So when you are trying to implement some form of new security strategy, you might run into culture issues that you need to start working on the developers or softening them up for what's about to come downstream. Is that something that's part of what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our clients have a platform or a software that they're a
Mhm.
product company. So, there is not just this, oh, security is part of IT and the development team is over here and we continue to help the ongoing battle that exists, right? This is, nope, we're brought in by those over those groups. And it's a top down view of, hey, we need to start addressing security, but we want to start making the right decisions because we can't afford to make the wrong ones. So, how do we go about that? And the C level roles, my view, CEO, CFO, yes, they're all the folks who make the big decisions and the final decisions. The CIO, the CISO, same thing. But that role is really about influencing and building relationships, making friends inside of organizations, getting people to understand this is why I'm here. This is my objective. I understand you are here and you have your objective, but let's figure out how what I need to see this organization do and what you need to see this organization do can work together. So even though we are not full-time employees or even full-time CISOs who are inside of organizations, they should be really striving to not just say, hey, here's the policy, why aren't you following it? Bad developer. It's here's the policy, here's what we need to go do. Why can't you follow it? Is there an issue? Is there a technical issue? Is there a cultural issue? Is there, a geographic issue that's keeping you from meeting the intended policy? I would rather have a less restrictive policy that 100% of the organization could easily follow than a very restrictive policy that I'm constantly trying to get everyone to follow, right? So Is the policy too prescriptive? Is the technology we selected or the processes we implemented too prescriptive or too restrictive? If so, my job is to rethink that. Like my job is not to, batten down the hatches and make everything like Fort Knox. By the way, Fort Knox isn't that secure. But like it's to get people to embrace security and build it into how they do things, right? So that's through training, that's through education. Where possible, you throw the layup and you introduce the technology to use, but you have to build it into how people are doing it because all these groups together are focusing on the business. And if you're doing anything to block the business, you're doing it wrong. So, as a CISO, my saying is enable the business, minimize asset loss. I do those two things. I feel as I'm successful in the role. Enabling the business is also enabling development teams, IT teams, accounting teams, HR teams, all of them to do their job correctly and as securely as you can make them. Compliance is another initiative. I can't even argue with compliance, right? So regulator comes down and says you have to do these things. I'm not sitting there going, no, like it's wear orange, pay money, or follow the regulation. So it's not about compliance. It's about what's the security means. Now, luckily, there's a lot of compliance initiatives, and I think the movement in compliance and the standards that have come out have caught up with what we've expected to see out of security in the last 10 years, 5 years. So that's good. But with development teams, it's hey, we have to do these things. I don't like it, you don't like it, but we have to do these. Okay, how do we make this easy for you to adopt? MFA was probably the biggest one in the last 5 years for most people, which still shocks me. But it's like, hey, can we just make sure that you are who you say you are when you're accessing what you're supposed to be accessing? Great, and this makes sense. Let's make it as least obtrusive as possible and easy for you. So where we're integrating it into single sign-ons and any other type of identity federations, embrace that. Don't just say, hey, here's Okta, good luck. Like that, you're gonna fail in the role. No one's gonna be in your corner when you need them there. In like 6 months as a CISO.
It's funny, you remind me of a paper I read I think it was probably 3-4 years ago, which defined the 4 tribes of the CISO. And obviously the best one was security as an enabler. The worst one was security as a cost center. And in the middle, you could get overly wrapped up in technology, like solving a problem with Okta, for example, thinking we've done it because the marketing material told us we'd done it. And it's interesting. Like it's still a common struggle when you go into an organization and you don't just assess the security gaps, but also potentially the cultural gaps where you're finding limitations in how much they're willing to spend on security or seeing the ROI on that. Is that a common struggle? Yeah.
It is, but I'll tell you what's in even more is when you sit down with a CEO, a CFO, and the rest of the C-suite, and you one-on-one talk to them about what is their view or perceived view of risk tolerance at that organization from their seat. And when you work yourself through the interviews, as we do, it's amazing how no one is the same. Yet everyone believes that the rest of the group that we're talking to, they're all collectively looking at the same risk tolerance as each other. And then you come back and you're like, hey, guess what? Your CFO, their risk tolerance is here. Your CEO's risk tolerance is here. Your IT group is here. And it's all over the map. And you're like, and here's why. Okay? Because they don't have visibility into the risks that you're seeing, vice versa, right? So there's like this lack of, and this is, you see enterprise risk groups established at larger organizations, and this is usually where this comes out and is very transparent and very vocal. Smaller organizations, they don't stand up ERMs, they don't stand up enterprise risk groups and committees because they're too small. They haven't matured to that stage. But that's the thing that comes out the most. It's not culture. It's the thing that we run into more often is this differentiation of perceived risk tolerance by each individual leader. And then it's a matter of bringing it back and going, okay, so here's who's the high watermark, and are they right? Okay, and if so, here's what you need to do to now meet that. And is everyone on board? Those are huge discussions, and it's amazing how many C-suites, leaders, founders, even private or VC behind some of these groups don't ever talk about that until all of a sudden we show up and it's like, hey, here's a discussion that we need to have first before we look at anything else. I don't want to talk about your firewalls or anything else. Let's talk about this. And everyone's like, oh, I don't need to. Well, let's just talk about it a little bit. You get it going. And amazingly, it's every single time I had no idea that's how everyone else thought. Oh, it's because you guys have never really talked about it.
That's fascinating. It's good that I like how you probably not accidentally called out the CEO FO of having a very high risk tolerance, and the CEO who may have been the founder of the business, engineering driven,
Hmm.
who just wants the product to be awesome, has an incredible risk tolerance, and how they maybe haven't even had that conversation between them two. They're just making assumptions about
Right.
where they feel security would fit into this. That is really interesting before you even get to the rest of the company, and how these dueling ideas have been conveyed intentionally or accidentally to the way the rest of the company is now viewing their risk tolerance as a whole.
Sure. And think about the teams underneath them, right? You've got a CEO
Mhm.
or a CTO or a founder who's got his group and tribe underneath him. And then you've got maybe the CFO or another founder or maybe three founders, and they've kind of got their different groups because they're all out there doing individual things for the collective good. So each of these groups now are kind of taught and biased to their leader's view of risk tolerance, which creates not animosity but friction between the groups when they actually
Mhm.
start running into this, which is why we don't start going into those groups first talking about tech processes and people around cyber risk. It's because we already know what we're going to walk into. We're walking into their
Mm.
leaders instilled mindset of risk management. So you go to the top level first, solve it there, get them to realize and recognize, oh yeah, we don't agree on this. Once we do, then collectively they're able to push it down and start reshaping the behaviors of those underneath them to now adopt what we're about to come in and start proposing. It's security for me is so much not about technology and actually the processes. It is about the people and cultural change and behavioral, it's more so behavioral change within groups and individuals. So a lot of I love psych and soc because it gives you a great amount of insight into like why does this one person think this way? Oh, it's because that's how they're conditioned. Why does this group act this way? Oh, that's because that's how they were formed. And once you can start pulling that apart and understanding what those influences are, you can then really change the security and get because tech and process, it's more about adoption, not implementation. You need people to adopt. Implementation is easy. I flip a switch, it's on. Getting somebody to accept it, you can't flip a switch. It takes, psych will tell you that it takes 6 to 8 months for a human to take an action and turn it into a learned behavior.
Mm.
So that type of shaping is not as simple as like, oh, flip that bit and now everyone's good and we're using it. It's no, you need to re-engineer people's thinking into like this is how it's supposed to be because the people over you, that's how they're thinking now that we brought it to light. um, yeah, I don't know
Wow.
if we went too deep on that, but like
No, no, we
this
didn't
is
at
usually the
all, because
struggle.
I have worked predominantly for vendors who sell automation or tooling or something that is not actually the solution to the problem.
Hmm.
It is something that can be used as a tool, but sometimes too often they put the cart before the horse, and they're bringing in tooling, and they are in no way, shape, or form ready for the adoption of what that is, because they haven't started at the top and had the right culture instilled through the right hierarchies that they've got in place. And it's really good that you brought that up, because I think it's absolutely essential for people to understand that there is, from an automation or technology perspective, I've run into resistances where they say, well, we have no potential for top down mandate of any kind because we can't mandate what developers do, for example.
Hmm.
But that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about leading by example, or culture change, and that's a different kind of top down. It's not a mandate per se. It's a way of people are looking up for inspiration, and
Hmm.
that change can happen without it feeling like a mandate.
Right. Yeah, you can. A mandate's easy. You write a
Right.
decree and this is what we're doing. Shaping
Yeah.
your organization takes time. I'm doing this now with my own organization. Like I'm setting the tone from the top to like our 19, 20 people. I forget how many we had, like 20 people. And like, this is how I want us to operate. This is how I want us to present ourselves. This is how, I want us to be viewed by the outside world. I'm not expecting anybody to have read the documents that we put together, my partners and I penned to then, like tomorrow, be living that. I
Mm-hmm.
expect to have put that out once, talked about it during our staff meetings, and continually reinforce it over time, so that within 6 months, oh, this is how we present SideChannel, right? This is when somebody talks to us, this is what they should be expecting. This is how I should present. This is because, CISOs, all my CISO teams are great, but a lot of them, most of them haven't ever actually been consultants. So I'm teaching a lot of very well experienced CISOs to now live a consulting life, which is different than working for a company full time or two or three companies full time over 20 years. Consulting isn't for everyone, and it's not, I don't think it's a natural thing to just pick up. So by me presenting and creating that, it's like, oh, I get it now. This is okay. So I'm adopting this process, right? A decree would just me being saying like everyone has to wear collared shirts. Well, that's easy. Okay, but can I
And
get
nobody
you?
will.
Can we get the team to adopt wanting to present and wear that way and act as executives and present as executives, being former executives, but now knowing that everyone's remote or as it's opening up. That's been the biggest thing this last year. It's like, but you're still on camera, you're still meeting with people.
Mm.
People are expecting to talk to somebody who's been a CISO for 20 years. I'm not saying wear a shirt and tie, but put a polo on, no
Yeah.
t-shirts.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing just happened. I think I've just seen that across even with clients too. It's like people just have gotten very, very casual. But that's a behavior piece because they've been allowed to. And now think about
Mhm.
reeling everyone back in the next 6 months to a year, if they're in office or not. It's like, how do you want your company to be viewed when they're talking to somebody who's from your company? If it's on Zoom or if they're sitting across the conference table from you.
We're going into the philosophy of human behavior quite a bit here because I totally agree with you about the way people are behaving on Zoom versus the way they would dress and act totally different if they were in an office. And the
Right.
same thing is, well, it's like the theory that you become the average of your friends. It's if you're going in and you see this behavior around you, then that becomes the culture of your behavior. And Zoom has
Mm-hmm.
really lowered the bar in terms of the way people can act. And if Zoom were security, that we'd be in a really bad state.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to ask you a
Yes.
question about the way technology changes around you as you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
do what you do. And I'll use the last 6 years in my experience for that, where people went from having large teams in centralized offices writing, say, a piece of software like let's use banking software as an example. They're writing something
Mm-hmm.
that is there and is present, and it's moved from being in a data center and now it's going into the cloud, and we're moving in a direction that essentially is kind of flipping a lot of the requirements for security on its head. And do the essentially though the same strategies and philosophies of security still play out, even though the technological solutions are different. Do you run into resistance where people don't think that's the case, or am I wrong?
No, I think a lot of our, I mean, unless they're very, I don't want to say legacy, but like very traditional data centers at headquarters. Everyone's been sitting at headquarters, large operations, right? You run into, well, why do we have to move to the cloud? Like, I'm not saying you have to, but your CTO is saying you're going to, and how are you going to do it securely? You can't just pick it up and move it over. I think
You
we don't get
can.
a lot of resistance from, yeah, we don't get a lot of resistance on the from that side of things because I think a lot of what we've seen and talked to folks about is not why are we moving there, but well, we're already there. What do we do about it now?
Mm,
And what should we have been doing about it for the last 5 years? So for us, it's the concepts are the same. How you enact them are different, right? We're not creating defense in depth bastion hosts in that traditional security approach from 10 years ago around cloud and everything. We're so decentralized that I like taking the view of even your internal network you should look as being hostile. Like treat everything like the internet, right? Everything is a bad neighborhood. Everything is a just do not trust wherever you are. So zero trust and all that, but like
mm,
it's about the endpoint you're on, and it's about the identity that access that you have associated with your account or your identity. Those two things, those are where we're pushing people to start thinking about because there are still some of those holdouts of like, oh well, we have this firewall in place, or don't we need this type of? It's like no, where are your people? They're everywhere. Okay, what are they on? BYOD or corporate? Both? Great. Okay. Here's what we're working with. We need a solid identity access management program with MFA so that no matter what your person is signing on from, they are who they say they are, and they're allowed to access what we say they're allowed to access in a way that is efficient for them to do it repeatedly so they don't try to usurp any of those controls. And it's easy for you to either provision or deprovision them or their successor, or the additional person to their team in the future. Because like the worst thing you can do is create the great one process for that guy or girl, and then have to have 3 weeks to replicate it to bring on somebody else. So you need something that is repeatable, and again, it's easily adopted by those individuals. So pushing everything out to, I'm looking at my laptop, but like everything I can to where I'm working from as much as I possibly can. And then the identity. And then wherever you're hosted, is it whatever cloud instance or even your data center, treat them kind of the same. Your data center, your cloud instances, whatever it is, treat them as if they are all open on the internet and publicly accessible. If you look at them that way, then you can go into them and say, okay, here's how we're going to secure this from everyone else. Here's how we're going to make these services available to those who need it, prod, test, development, whatever. And that's data center. Same thing is going to be in the cloud. So that's kind of an endpoint game as well, right? Like you're going to where the endpoint is, whether it's your application, your web services, or your developer or your HR analyst on their laptop in name a place in the world right now. So that's been the big thing, and a lot of people understand that and they get it. In fact, I think they probably embrace it more so because it allows for the flexibility. And I think is when we lead with that conversation of, again, we started full time in 2019 before COVID. So when COVID happened to us, it was a Tuesday. It wasn't like everyone was remote already for us. So we're like, all right, well, we're already kind of talking
Right.
about this. But for the rest of the world, they all went, oh my God, we're all remote now. Well, as we come out of this, that's not going to change. Like, so how do we think remote first, and how do we create security for remote first type of operations? And most people over this last year have now fully embraced, maybe not wanting to be remote or their workforce to be remote, but they've embraced how remote should work or does work. And now they're really open to, okay, now I understand how remote works. What do we have to do to secure it so that we can either choose to continue or not continue, or some type of hybrid in between? That's been the biggest thing I've seen with clients and prospective clients, or a lot of people who ask about it. It's like, hey, we're not sure what we're going to do in 16 months or 18 months, if we're going to still be in this full remote or we're going to be on prem. What are our options so that we can go either way? And it's like, oh, great. Go back 20 years. If you would have taken anything that we're applying now to like 20 years ago, oh, no way. Not a chance. I
Hmm.
think we would have been like dead in the water. I think a lot of these, if this had happened, if 2020 had happened in 2000 or 2010, as like we really all as a society really started adopting and relying on technology and those capabilities, maybe less so 2000, probably like at 2010, we would have been in a world of hurt and a different pain point based on the adoption and the capabilities that we could have driven at the time and thinking versus now. But then again, who knows? I could be completely wrong. We would have maybe come out of it like rainbows and sunshine.
That yeah, I am curious about that because there's been a lot of questions about people saying what would have happened if the pandemic happened, and then name a year, and there's your bar conversation for the next hour
Right.
and a half. But it's been interesting that as people have moved towards, say, cloud applications, a lot of the teams became separated and became remote,
Yeah.
as a part of that, as smaller teams and smaller microservice-based architectures, et cetera, to applications and whatnot, right? And then the pandemic came along, and it was almost like, thank goodness that we were a little bit prepared for this. But what I'm wondering is, do you think the pandemic has a little bit
Yeah. A little
has
bit.
improved things because we've been forced remote, and as we come out of it, we're actually going to be much better for it. Is that
Yeah.
silver line to the pandemic somehow?
Yeah. It's an unintended consequence. That's This is the silver lining, I think, out of all of this, is that it has forced everyone to think about either you're going to be remote or you already were remote, but you weren't doing anything correctly about it. And now you
Mm,
have to. It's so forced. Like we saw a lot of clients and a lot of asks in March, April, May of last year, who were going, starting basically with our VPN just toppled over. We can't have everyone keep remoting back in to do work. What are our options? I was like, oh, seriously? You guys, that's how you guys operate? Like, yeah. Like, oh, okay. I I kept wrongly assuming people are farther along in their technology and adoption journeys. I suffer from this myself. My wife always makes fun of me. She's like, Brian, people don't think about the things that you're thinking about. They're not in your head. Other people have different, it's like, you've got to always kind of think about what other people are doing. I always wrongly assume that people are like thinking about this stuff because it could happen. It maybe it hasn't yet, but that's me. Like, I always think about like, oh, well, this could happen. So how do you prepare for it? Right. Um, this silver lining back to that is just that you are now either being forced to adopt something so that you can continue on until you will bring your organization back to an either in person or a hybrid approach, or it now allows you to just go, yep, we can work from anywhere. I think the biggest thing I've heard that's a super benefit out of that is just being able to find the right talent. New York City based operation. The talent that they really want is in the great suburb in a house that they can live in, suburb of Cincinnati. Guy or girl doesn't want to move, but perfect for the job. Hiring that person for that role now is going to become much more commonplace and acceptable than it ever was. And I think we're going to see organizations who struggle to find the right talent and retain the right talent start getting the right talent. And we're going to start seeing people who are the right talent start working for companies that they've always wanted to. I think that's great. If anything good comes out of all of this, I think the workforce and its change that'll be it.
That'd be awesome. I saw an article a few weeks ago that said, well, there's always articles saying what the deficit is in the security workforce. And I think this number was
Oh, it's
650,000 jobs. And I don't know, whatever, right? 2 years ago, it was 2
ridiculous.
million. And I don't
Yeah.
think it matters either way, whether it's 2 million or 650,000. If this pandemic byproduct and the acceptance that you can work remote right by default
Mm-hmm.
helps solve that problem, I mean, that already is a huge advantage.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I I
So
had it at the Fortune 500 I was at in like 20 early on, like a year or two in. We really needed a senior level um, threat hunter, incident responder in house on the team. Like just the nature of how I constructed the team and what we were dealing with, it required it. I couldn't get anybody to move out to Worcester, which is I think it's like the second largest city in Massachusetts.
mhm.
No one wants to, no one in my field, like people aren't flocking there. Okay. I love the city. I love where we live, but I can't get people to move there. Right. When I was there, the talent that we found was out of North Carolina, and he was established, wife and kids, great house, community, wasn't moving, but he was the guy that we wanted, and we can get him at the price that we could. And I was like, the cultural internal battle for me at that company to get that level of a role to not be full time in a button seat in my organization. And by the way, this is somebody who reported 2 layers below me. So why HR, senior leadership had a big issue with a remote capability like that? I was like, why isn't this up to me? Like, I have the right talent. The right talent is right there. This is the guy that we can do. He can literally do this job from anywhere. He happens to be in North Carolina. That type of cultural like thinking, like so predominant. And I really wonder if now that is going to have been just wiped out, or if people are going to kind of now start falling back to it because forced remote work is not a thing. And I wonder if it is forced and people are starting to force people to come back in, if we don't see a slight uprising and people just say, you know what, nope, I don't want this job anymore, and we just see a mass exodus in people who don't want to do that because they've tasted what it's like elsewhere. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting next year.
So I'm gonna end. I know we're getting to the end of our normally allotted time. I was gonna ask, where is your current biggest struggle with implementing security in that sort of mid-level organization?
um that's a good question.
Yeah, it's pretty broad, so feel free to take your time.
Yeah, we see, so compliance initiatives are always the toughest, because you've got this, we get a lot of customers who come to us and say, hey, we have to meet X because we're in this industry, or our customer requires that, so we have to do X. And even when you have that as a backing and you're like, well, great, okay, based on who you are and what you do, and here's some solutions, this is what you can go do. And it's still like a struggle to like that thought process of getting people to understand. It's like, but let's back up. Like you came to me with this thing that you had to meet. You wanted me to figure out the solution for you to meet it. And now you're questioning if you have to even do it. Why did you come to me in the first place? Like, so when I run into those are always tricky. We overcome them, but that's a big piece for me, which I just don't understand. But then again, I don't run a large business myself, so maybe it's different thinking when people are doing that. I think the second, probably the bigger issue is actually finding the talent and getting the right talent into some of these organizations that are the full-time engineers, architects, analysts, those roles, and getting the right people to come in and execute and fulfill what you hired them to go do. The hard part is us as a fractional, resource into an organization, the ability to mentor that role that needs to be full-time in that organization is limited. And there's not necessarily somebody in that organization who has our experiences that can mentor that person appropriately. So if we put a GRC analyst in or a security operations person into an org, who else, and they're the only ones who's full time with that title and we're there part time, who in that organization is going to mentor that person so that they stay and they grow? So it can fall to us, but again, it's difficult because we're not there full time. So that is a hard component to do, and it's definitely a struggle. And it's a matter of just shaping a program correctly and getting the client to understand, hey, if you want this resource to be here for more than a year, um, you should probably figure out how we can invest some time either through us or through you to mentor them to be, you know, better or great. Because there's this thinking still about, oh, every client is always hiring that unicorn or that person who is perfect. And there's so much in this industry that requires uplifting and mentoring, that next generation and whoever else is in. And this is even with CISOs too, that security is just so foreign or so much of a concern that people are like, I don't even know what to do with that, or I can't mentor them. So I'm expecting somebody who can come in that I don't have to do anything with. They just know how to do everything. It's like, well, unless you got a money tree in the backyard, you're not hiring a team of those people. So you still need to kind of mentor and bring stuff, people up. So I think that's probably a big issue. I don't think there's a big issue with technology anymore, with the type of new tech that's out and some of the things I'm seeing. Um, I think that's the least of our worries is the tech. It's it's around it's back to that behavioral and that cultural piece.
It makes sense. It makes sense. When we're talking about the chain of people, process, and technology, we're overloaded with technology, and so you can get a good process in place, but finding the people to sustain it over time, that's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Was there anything you were hoping I was going to ask you about, like your golf game,
Oh
or
no, please don't ask me about my golf game.
that you wanted to
No,
you were hoping you could talk about today?
no, this is great. I mean, the if you I'm putting out I'm a contributing author on a book on NIST that's going to be coming out at the end of this year, so I'm very excited to see that come out. It's going to be an academic book published by Wiley. The primary author is Cynthia Brumfield. She's phenomenal. I've had the pleasure of being able to work with her and being named as a contributing author, co-author on that book. So excited to see that come out because I want to see these college students learn about NIST and in a way that I don't think they've had access to. Kind of along those same lines, the whole reason I started my CISOLIFE, my hashtag CISOLIFE YouTube show was to start putting out and talking about each of the NIST controls in a series of videos because I've had a lot of people just ask me about it. I implemented it at Pentagon. I implemented it at a couple different places. And I like talking on it. I feel pretty confident that I know my way around that framework. But I wanted to put something out for free. So that's why I started the whole CISOLIFE thing. And from there, it just turned into a kind of a fun show to just kind of talk about stuff and give me an opportunity to write on a board, which I didn't get to do today, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, you should have hit me up with some kind of seeded question that allowed you to draw something clever. Oh, that was great, Brian. Thank you very much for being on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope the listeners really enjoyed it, and maybe in a year or so we'll get you back on so you can tell me how things have developed post pandemic.
Definitely. Thank you, Steve. No, this is great, and I hope everybody's safe out there, and I wish you all well.